The US versus Greenland. Who would win and what kind of firepower are both sides looking at? Greenland is the territory of Denmark, not technically independent but enjoying great autonomy. At any given time, Greenland hosts a mix of European forces and a mostly US presence. That's because the US has long treated the island as a staging ground for defending the Western Hemisphere. But if a full-scale invasion ever happened, the primary forces standing in the way wouldn't be American, they would be Denmark's. And yes, it would trigger a full-blown NATO crisis, but for this scenario, we're only focusing on these two countries as combatants. When it comes to manpower, the US is the clear winner. If, for some reason, a war were to go long, maybe Denmark weaponizes the narwhal population in the waters off of Greenland, then the US would have a much deeper reserve of manpower to call upon in a protracted war. The US has approximately 150 million people available for military service, with 124 million of them fit for service. Denmark has 2.6 million, but a much higher fit-for-service ratio at 2.1 million. Active duty forces disproportionately favor the US. With 1.3 million active duty troops, the US is one of the largest militaries in the world. Denmark, meanwhile, has a force of only 20,000 active duty troops. America's deep reserves number at nearly 800,000, while Denmark's only number at 12,000. Both countries maintain unusually high reserve readiness, unlike most nations, meaning reservists could be mobilized and pushed into combat operations far faster. Active duty readiness is also extremely high for both nations. Despite its small size, Danish troops punch significantly above their weight due to modern equipment and high training standards. But Denmark differs from the US in one key regard. The Danish people operate under a total defense doctrine, wherein the entirety of Danish society is committed to the defense of the territory. Thus, a total Danish military response would see the recruitment of as many as 40,000 additional personnel, including police forces from Denmark and Greenland, the Home Guard, and the Danish Emergency Management Agency. The first skirmish over Greenland would be in the air. The United States brings just over 13,000 aircraft to the fight, while Greenland only brings 117. Of those numbers, nearly 1,800 are fighters on the US side, with 31 on the Danish side. Though most of Denmark's fighters are now F-35s, while the US would still be bringing mixed fleets to the fight. Initial losses could disproportionately favor Denmark, despite overall air victories for the US. Any rumor of secret backdoors in an export model of the F-35 is ridiculous. A vulnerability like that could be exploited by an adversary, and if it were ever discovered, it would permanently undermine trust in the exporter and kill future sales. The US would have to knock out Denmark's F-35s the old-fashioned way. Mobility is what really wins wars, not firepower. The US has invested in the world's largest air mobility fleet, allowing it to quickly transport equipment, supplies, and personnel anywhere in the world. With 918 transport aircraft, US forces would be very well supplied as they land on Greenland, while Denmark has only 4 dedicated large cargo transport aircraft. As the US proved in its raid in Venezuela, special mission aircraft are critical to the success of modern military operations. This includes everything from air traffic control and warning to electronic warfare. The US excels in this arena, with a fleet of 647 special mission aircraft packed to the brim with cutting-edge technology to shut down enemy awareness and communications. Denmark, meanwhile, only operates 3 maritime patrol aircraft. Denmark has no independent AWACS aircraft vital to modern air combat operations, but is aggressively pursuing the capability, as it looks to move away from utilizing shared NATO AWACS aircraft. In case of conflict with invading Americans, it's unlikely NATO would release those aircraft for Danish use, or support Danish forces with them. Unmanned aerial vehicles, or UAVs, are increasingly important in modern war, and the US operates a large fleet of hundreds of different-sized UAVs. Denmark, meanwhile, is only now starting to add to its arsenal of larger-body UAVs, with 4 MQ-9s on order from the US. A Greenland invasion would have some similarity to the Venezuelan raid in Caracas, which means that helicopters would play a vital role. The US operates nearly 6,000 helicopters against Denmark's 34, and fields just over 1,000 attack helicopters versus none on the Danish side. A lack of attack aviation would significantly diminish the ability to defend against US forces performing an amphibious landing, while US attack aircraft would be available in quantity to deliver close-in fire support, despite air defense threats. An invasion would inevitably mean a confrontation between armored vehicles. The US operates 4,600 tanks versus Denmark's 44. Both nations' tank forces are very modern, with Denmark operating the Leopard 2, which has shown exceptional performance in Ukraine against superior Russian numbers. The Leopard 2, however, has never had to take on the American Abrams. Regardless of its performance, it's clear US numbers would be overwhelming. When it comes to armored mobility and support, the US fields nearly 400,000 armored vehicles, ranging from the less capable Strykers to Bradley IFVs. Denmark operates nearly 4,000 armored vehicles of its own, relying on the Swedish-made CV90, the Swiss-made Piranha 2C and Piranha 5 for protected mobility. Danish forces would count on around 600 infantry fighting vehicles to take on an active fleet of 3,700 Bradleys, with another 2,800 in storage. Mobile fire support heavily favors the Americans, with 671 self-propelled artillery vehicles versus Denmark's 19. Denmark is up the Gunno with no paddle, with zero towed artillery though. This leaves its troops completely vulnerable to long-range fire support on the US side to the tune of almost 1,200 howitzers. MLRS, or Multiple Launch Rocket System, is used to hammer an enemy position with enough near-simultaneous strikes to deny the enemy the opportunity to seek cover. They are devastating against unprepared enemy formations, and the US fields a force of 641, which were used to apocalyptic effect against Iraqi Republican Guard forces in both invasions of Iraq. Denmark, meanwhile, only operates 8 units. Denmark was once a respected naval power, but those glory days died with the age of sail. However, Danish forces are very modern and punch significantly above their weight, despite small fleet size and smaller combatants. Against a US fleet of 440 ships, the Danish bring 50 to the fight. 0 aircraft carriers rival America's 11 supercarriers and 9 light carriers. Neither do the Danish bring any submarines to face off against America's 70 attack and nuclear ballistic missile submarines. Instead of larger destroyers, of which the US operates 81, Denmark opts for the smaller frigates, with 9 in its fleet against 0 on the US side. America fills the corvette role mostly with its littoral combat ship, bringing 26 to the table against Denmark's 0. It's clear that in any invasion of Greenland, even a full Danish defense on the massive island would heavily favor the United States, to the point that resistance is futile. Danish forces don't lack for quality or training, however, consistently performing at the top of the NATO pile during joint operations. What they lack is numbers and the hardware to oppose an invasion by the Americans. In any amphibious operation, you can't bring 100% of your combat power to bear at once, so even with vastly greater numbers overall, the US would still be limited, both by what it can afford to pull away from the other commitments and by how many troops it can physically land on a hostile beach at any one time. The US has the greatest amphibious capability in the world, but it is still limited to roughly 30,000 personnel a day if it committed its entire amphibious forces to a single operation. Given the US cannot possibly commit its entire amphibious capability to a single theater of war, a more realistic number may be a combat surge force of about 20,000 troops a day. If Danish defenders could bolster their number by about 3 times and somehow neutralize US air power, a frankly impossible feat, they could likely hold the island long enough to bleed US political willpower. But in any realistic scenario, the US takes Greenland easily and shoots itself in the foot. NATO would implode overnight, and without basing rights in Europe, still the most important logistical hub in the entire US military, America's global reach would collapse. The US would degrade from a global power to a regional one, with entire parts of the world effectively cut off unless it relied on something close to orbital logistics. Now go check out This Will Happen If the US Pulls Out of NATO Day by Day, or click on this video instead.